Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small Adventure Travel Podcast. We have something a little different for you today. Very, very exciting. We've got Rob Hamill. He's with the Cruising Kiwis. We're going to learn what all that's about. But he is a boat captain, skipper, sailor, all kinds of things that are going on here. And super excited to learn more about, Rob, what you're doing with you and your family. It's pretty cool. So welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, Jason. Looking forward to having a yarn with you and your followers and supporters. Yeah.
No, this is pretty cool. You're doing something that I used to sit on the couch probably for a year or two watching YouTube videos about people sailing around the world. And I used to, I'd say to she's now my ex-wife, and I'd look at her and say, hey, let's buy a sailboat. And you and me and Jackson, our son, can go travel the world in a sailboat. And she looked at me like, there's no effing way I'm going to do that. She's now my ex-wife. And I'm traveling full time, but I'm not on a sailboat like you are. So I'm pretty intrigued. I think what you're doing is pretty cool. So look forward to learning more about that. Where are you right now? Where are we having? I'm in Colombia. Where are you?
Right now we're in Rebec Marina, which is on a small private island which has a resort attached to the marina, or rather the marina is attached to a resort. The island itself is a 5-minute boat ride off the island of Langkawi, which is part of Malaysia. So basically I'm in Malaysia in a small marina just off the coast of Langkawi Island.
Very, very cool. And who's with you?
Well, my wife is somewhere in a berth downstairs. My eldest son is in another berth downstairs. And my second eldest son has just dashed it to the island of Langkawi that I just mentioned on the ferry, because I left my cell phone on our rental motorbike, little scooter, when we got the ferry back about an hour ago. And I've sent him back in to go get my phone. Yeah.
Is every day kind of like that, Rob, when you're traveling with your family?
Phones and me are a disaster. I have phone anxiety. Like a lot of people around the world, I'm sure a lot of you can empathize with me, because I am one of the worst examples of phone anxiety, leaving the phone. Anyway, and that's an example right there.
And how old are your sons?
My eldest boy, who's not here with us, is 21. He's in New Zealand. Second eldest, that's Finn. The second eldest is Declan, 19, and youngest, 16. Is Ivan. And Rachel, my wife, has just turned 50-something yesterday.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. And so it's really the four of you that are doing most of this traveling. Does your eldest come join you sometimes as well?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, Finn joined us about September last year. He just come back from the World Rowing Champs in Serbia, and he was transiting home back to New Zealand to then begin preparations for hopefully this year, which will hopefully be an Olympic year for him.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Very cool. So there's so many things. The last time you and I chatted, we came up with some things that we thought would be pretty interesting, and there's a lot of it. And let's start with let's go back a ways. Like, how did you get from wherever you were to where you are now? I don't know how far back we need to go, but how far back do you think we should go to make all that relevant? Is this a childhood thing? Where did this all start?
I guess you could argue I did a little bit of sailing when I was a 10. My dad put me in a little, if you know what an optimist yacht is, little 7-foot dinghy that kids start their very first experience, often as an optimist in Europe and America. For New Zealand, it's a P-class yacht, similar size. My dad threw me in one of those, and I started learning how to sail there. Did that for 2 or 3 years, and then I quit, moved on, discovered kind of other things, partying, and sailing
Girls.
didn't seem that exciting. I didn't want to say that, so but yeah, kind of. Well, actually, other sport as well took my eye as well. But yes, all that stuff, and a little bit of alcohol as well took over. But there's a lot of reasons for that. Actually, I had some stuff going on that was not so great, and it was a bit of an escape. That's a whole other story. But
I'm curious. Was your dad got you into sailing? Was your dad a sailor then? I take it.
Yes, he had a keen interest in sailing. Yeah, he did a lot of sailing.
Okay, what does a keen interest mean to you? I'm curious.
Well, he was brought up with sailing boats. His father did a lot of sailing and really old boats that like those funny looking boats with the sails that had square sails and all sorts of stuff. And my dad actually, when he was 19, set to sea. He took set to sea as a life, which was a New Zealand registered boat. I don't know who with, maybe that, I'm not sure. But so he was like a greenhorn, and he went sailing across the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand, and literally learning the ropes there as a 19-year-old kid. And and he told tall stories of nearly dying and hanging off ropes in big storms and having to tie up sails and nearly losing his life several times doing that sort of thing. And then he went on to...
And he thought it was a good idea to teach you to sail.
Yeah, that's right. But after that, he got through it okay. He figured, well, maybe my kids will too. So he did implant the sailing thing into his children. Yeah.
So now I got to ask about Mom. How did Mom feel about all this? Because I'm sure those stories that you just kind of relayed, I'm sure she heard those stories as well. And was she supportive of his sailing? Was she supportive of you getting into it?
Yeah, look, it was a hobby, a sport. Any sport that for kids is a good thing. Whatever it is, whether it's sailing, whether it's rugby, soccer, volleyball, anything. It does. Actually, in fact, any activity, whether it's art and music or singing and dancing, as long as you're doing something, and it's and certainly my mother and father were very supportive of whatever, and they were trying to expose us things. Hence, Dad exposed me to the yacht, getting into a small yacht at a young age. I didn't carry on with it, but it then led into other things, and I certainly became very active in other sports.
Right. Was your mom into sailing as well?
No, she was an armchair sailor. Yeah, no, Mum wasn't active in many ways in that sense at all. She was the home giver, the home carer. She looked after the stuff going on in the background, and she was fantastic. Really. She loved hosting people, and my friends and my siblings' friends all said that whenever we'd turn up at the Hamill's place, there was a guaranteed feast on the table. They'd always be fed well and looked after, and it's a wonderful home that the mum and dad created for all our guests.
Sometimes it's nice when you have that kind of grounded person in the relationship. Sometimes, that can provide that kind of that home base and that sense of safety or whatever, which then allows us to go out and have some adventures as well. And as somebody who's been traveling full time for the last couple of years, and you've been traveling, full time obviously as well, it's I can see that benefit. So you took some time away from sailing, you got involved in some other stuff, life happened, and how did you get back into it?
So I think the seed was sown, I guess, from that age, but it was mainly sown through my brother, my father, obviously, but my eldest brother, he set sail. He's went away. He went on, we call it OE in New Zealand, you have your overseas experience. And most elder teenagers and kids into their 20s maybe, will go overseas for a year or 2 or 3 or 5, having their overseas experience. Kerry took off, and his was in the form of sailing. He bought a yacht up in Darwin. Just after Cyclone Tracy in 1974 wiped out Darwin, Kerry went up there and started a concreting firm to make some quick money and then get enough money together to buy a yacht, which he did so, and with a friend and a Canadian friend and his girlfriend, he set off from Darwin for the adventure of a lifetime on a 28-foot Malaysian built BEDAR was the type of yacht. that he purchased, and they set off. And this is back in 1977, where up into sailing into Southeast Asia, which would have been so raw and untouched and beautiful, and it still is. It's a little more built up now, but they went into this countries, for an adventure of a lifetime, and we followed. And the reason I say that is because we, as a family, followed Kerry's journey through his letter writing that he sent back to us in New Zealand, which my dad would read out aloud, and we'd all sit around, and live vicariously by his adventures. And boy, that really sowed a seed for me. Not super consciously, but certainly subconsciously. And actually, no, consciously still, I thought, I'd love to do that or something like that one day. But it didn't sit at the forefront of my thinking. Other stuff in my life took over, and I went on to other passions and activities. But it sat there.
And something you mentioned there about just the letter writing and you sitting down and listening to your dad read the letters. Yeah. And just thinking how different that is compared to how you're sharing your stories now. I mean, we're sitting here having a podcast talking about your story, and you've got I think, YouTube channel and Instagram, and that has definitely changed. And we'll talk more about that later, because there's a lot more to your story about your brother. So let's dig into that.
Sure. Yes. Well, what happened was he was sailing for nearly a year up through Indonesia, and we were getting these amazing stories of what was happening there. And he went up into Malaysia and then Thailand, Phuket, Penang. He walked various places that we have just been sailing through ourselves. And then went down to Singapore and up the east coast of Malaysia to Kuala Terengganu. And that was the last letter that we received from Kerry, was written from that city port. And he was planning with his friend. His girlfriend got off the boat just prior to that to go and visit her parents, and his friend, a Canadian, Stuart Glass, and along with a paying charter, an Englishman, John Dewhurst, set sail for Bangkok. And this is in 1978 now, a year or so later, and they got blown off course into Cambodian waters. And ended up taking shelter behind an island called Koh Tang Island, about 50 kilometres offshore. Little did they know, on the other side of that island was a Khmer Rouge naval gun base. This is the era of Pol Pot, the Pol Pot regime of the Khmer Rouge. And that night they were attacked by a gunboat out of the blue, shot the shots out of the blue, were rained upon their little 28-foot wooden vessel. And Stuart was shot and killed at that time. And my brother and the charter, John Dewhurst, were taken prisoner back to Tulsling Prison in Phnom Penh, where they were kept for 2 months. They were tortured, forced to sign confessions to being CIA, and then when it were executed. And wow. And at that time, we had no idea what had happened at all. The letters just stopped, and we had as time went by, my parents became more and more concerned and very in the end very desperate to find out any news they could from anywhere, ports in Southeast Asia, and they wrote letters all over to friends who may have heard from him, and there was just nothing. And then, the worst, we thought maybe pirates or shipwreck, but never did we ever think for a moment what did happened until about 16 months after that last letter was received. We heard through the media what had happened to my brother.
So it took 16 months for this to get out, and the media had to pick it up. And so he'd been gone already for over a year. Yeah. I mean, as far as what had happened, wow.
History.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. Yeah. That's
so it was a pretty bad time. I mean, and obviously Kerry was taken in unspeakable and unimaginable, what he experienced and what John Dewhurst experienced. is just, you just cannot comprehend, the isolation, the loneliness and the terror. And then so my parents, when they heard the worst possible news, they had to, deal with that. And then, they had 4 other children to look after. I'm one of 5 kids, 3 brothers and a sister. And
how much older was Kerry than you are?
He was 12, about 12 and a half years older than me.
Okay.
I'm the youngest in the family. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was 27 at the time. And I was 14 when he went missing, and I just turned 16 when we heard the news, not long after.
So how did that – I'm just going to ask. I'm curious because I can imagine that can impact your life. And someone says, well, how did that impact your life? What's your answer? What do you want to share with us? Because I'm sure it could be a lot of things.
Could be. Look, it shaped our lives as a family in many different ways. I mean, for me, I sort of suggested earlier, alcohol took over a little bit for me. I 16, 17, 18, pretty vulnerable years to that sort of behaviour. And I certainly took advantage of that. And I had some close friends who were very much in that same line of activity. But fortunately, we all loved sport. And, when I wasn't wagging from school or if I was wagging, it was often if the surf was up, I was into surfing. But mainly I was into volleyball. And if I wasn't doing that, then I was drinking at night with my mates. But volleyball was a big deal for that period of my life, my school life. And then later on, when I left school, I took up rowing. I played rugby for a while, got beaten up every Saturday playing rugby. Most Kiwi boys have a go at rugby at some point, and I played rugby for a few years. And it was a great sport, mate. It's such a good sport. But you'd end up bloody hobbling around all week at work and then just didn't get fit again, just enough time for the next game Saturday, And I took up rowing and discovered I could brace myself, absolutely go hammer and tonk. And you could do it again, next week or next day, racing hard as you possibly could. And without risking major injury or someone kicking you in a ruck,
so that was thinking a combination of rugby and drinking with your mates, pretty hard on the body.
Yeah, it's pretty tough, but you're young and bulletproof, aren't you, Jace? You'll know that. You know those times. We all do.
Yeah, I vaguely recall some of them.
Yeah, vaguely. Yeah. Yeah. So that was my kind of thing, and sport saved me, and rowing became a real passion for me. And I started when I was 19, going 20, but in my early 20s, I decided I really wanted to have a crack at it. And went on to reasonable success in the sport.
Yeah, tell us about some of that, because one of the things you'd mentioned last time was the Atlantic rowing race. I'm just curious about this because I see on social media every once in a while someone that's rowing across a large body of water, and it looks pretty incredible. So I think our listeners and myself definitely would like to learn a little bit more about what goes through your mind when you get in a boat and start rowing these long distances.
Yeah, well, look, it all started when I was at the Olympics, actually, in Atlanta Olympics in 1996, part of the New Zealand rowing team there. And I saw a fly. So just before we went to Atlanta itself, we were training in Charlottesville, Georgia? Charlottesville? What state is Charlottesville?
North Carolina.
North Carolina, yes. Yeah, that's right. It's in the Carolinas. That's right. I think it's North Carolina. Yeah. And I saw a flyer on a notice board of the rowing club we were training out of, preparing to go down to Atlanta. And it said Atlantic Rowing Race. And this was a concept. And it was the first ever rowing race across an ocean for rowing boats. And it was to be crewed by 2 people. And I thought, mate, what an amazing, because I was thinking about retiring after the Olympics. I was going to move on to something else. And I thought, what a perfect kind of thing to transition into, from the Olympic rowing thing into ocean rowing. It might be okay at this kind of thing. I thought, I made a decision to have a crack at this thing, and the sense of adventure and the challenge and a race, it was just perfect. And so I made this call to have a crack at it. Then next thing I had to do was find somebody out there, a couple of egg whites short of Pav, to join me. A couple of tools missing from the toolbox who were keen to join me in this. And I went to my Olympic teammates. No one was interested. And I ended up coming back from the Olympics to try and get someone to help me row, because it was crews of 2. And I went to the media and a couple of people came out of the woodwork, and a guy called Phil Stubbs did so, and he was perfect teammate for the job. We turned up. It was about 18 months later for the start of this first ever rowing race across an ocean. The crews of two in these 23-foot plywood rowing boats, with 8mm ply between you and the ocean. And
Wow.
it was so exciting. Oh, my far out. It was an amazing feeling sitting there. There were 30 boats lined up, 60 athletes lined up for this first ever rowing race across an ocean. And
I'm curious what else is involved, because obviously I heard you say you needed to find a partner.
Yep.
I get that. You're an Olympic athlete, so you've got some credibility, I'm sure but then do you need to go find a sponsor?
Yeah, I skipped over that.
What all had to happen in order for you to actually start this race?
You could argue getting to the start was bigger a challenge than the race itself in some ways, because it was such a big call. I quit my job. I had a little apartment at the time, and I topped up the mortgage on the apartment and started looking for more money, because I just didn't have the dough to make it happen. And I, just sponsorship, went to talk to as many people as I could in our local community, and, bits and bobs came in, and look, we got to the start, but just, financially it wasn't in good shape at all. But we got to the start, and we trained our little hearts out with, I should say that all the entrants had to buy a kit set boat off the organisers. There was a slab of plywood, 23 sheets of plywood, 8mm thick ply. It was a pre-cut design. You stamp it out and you stick it together like a jigsaw puzzle. And then you add your character or your set of skills or whatever your beliefs and how you're going to make this boat fast as possible to get you across as safely as possible across the Atlantic. And of course, everyone had this basic shell, but they had very different takes on how to set it up for rowing, for example, how to provision for food, how to set up water, all sorts of things. And it became a very different ball game. And that became very evident once we got to the start line and actually started rowing.
Because everything that went with you had to start with you, right? There were no supply drops in the middle or anything like that.
That's right. Yeah, so you had to make your own water.
You stayed in it until you got to the other side, right?
Yeah, it was about 22,500 miles of open ocean from Tenerife and the Canary Islands to Barbados and the West Indies. Yeah, wow. So you had to be. I mean, there was a safety boat. There was one safety boat following the fleet, and we saw them on day 2, and that's the last we saw of them. But the boats were scattered all over the ocean. They were. Yeah,
I'm imagining one safety boat. You've got. You said 60 athletes. It was 30 boats.
Yep.
30 teams. Yeah. And I can see how after a couple of days, everybody's spread out. Yeah. And where were you? You were spread out. You were near the front, weren't you?
Well, it was funny because
this worked out.
Well, we did actually pretty well. We won the race in the end. Sorry to back that to you too quickly. I should have held on to that, but we did. We won the race, and it was just incredible. But we never knew how we were going during the race because we didn't have the communications on board with us. We chose not to take the sat phone communications with us because at that time it was very heavy piece of equipment, SSB, and all the battery power to run that and extra solar panels to charge. No, we're not going to take that. And a lot of other crews did have that on board, but the compromise of that was extra weight. And, one of the critical things, there's, like any project, you kind of go through the lists of critical kind of categories, I suppose, and and you try and get all the skills and all the factors up as high to 10. If you mark them out of 10, is get them all as close to 10 as you can. You'll not get any of them to 10, but hopefully you've got a few 7s, 8s, maybe a 9, and but you don't want to go below 6 or 5 or 4, hopefully, and any of them. But what I mean is, food, navigation, rowing setup, pretty important. The boat structure, the safety stuff, all these categories, and you want to get them, as I say, as close to 10. I mean, an example being you could row the fastest boat in the world, but if your navigation's off and you're going the wrong direction, you know what I mean, that's not going to work. And so you kind of had to just somehow, we knew our strengths. I mean, my strength was obviously rowing and actually setting up the boat. We set the boat up as well as we possibly could given the parameters we had with this boat. But, my weakness wasn't particularly being sea savvy. And so my teammate, and I chose him specifically, he needed to be good at rowing. He did surfboat rowing, but he'd also been to sea. He'd spent a lot of time at sea. And he had the navigation skills and that sort of sea savviness that goes with that. So we were kind of coming up that closer to 7, 8, on that mark. The food stuff we were, we were really hard on ourselves about how much food we took with us, and as we were going, we were making good progress. On day 5, we were going better than we thought we would have at that stage in terms of distance covered. So we dumped 20 days worth of food because there's a lot of weight we could save. Yep. So we had 70 day packs. We had 70 day packs, which the organizer said you've got to go have days. You've got to have 90 days worth of food, and we justified in the scrutineering. Well, 70 days can be 90 if we ration it out, and so they accepted that on that basis. But we probably had less food already than anyone else in the fleet, I suspect. And on day 5, we threw 20 days worth of food overboard, thinking that's going to help us go even faster. Because we were. Again, this is another category. You're a mixer. You're taking calculated risks, and that's life. Sometimes you've got to take a bit of a risk to get to the other, your desired goal. Now, at that time, of course, the next day the weather changed. We didn't know the weather system. We didn't have any weather reporting. The weather changed. We had seas coming right on the nose, and we started going backwards. After doing, 50, 60 miles a day for the first 3 or 4 or 5 days, we started going backwards straight after throwing the food overboard.
Oh, geez, yeah.
It was just a ridiculous scene. And we were going, oh, boy, that was a little bit hasty, for you, mate. And so, we became good again, and off we went. And look, we actually did finish with food left over, but we were pretty careful, what we did with that food from that point on. But to me, it was,
how many days then?
41 days. 41
days.
Yeah.
So it's 41 days in a little plywood boat with this guy that you've known for a little while, but not very long, presumably.
Didn't know Phil from a bar of soap. And he was tough as old boots, Phil. Best teammate for the job, even though we didn't know each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What did you give me one big thing you learned about life from that experience? I know there's more than one.
Yeah. Here's the thing. At the Olympics, I went to my fellow Olympic teammates saying, man, have you seen this amazing concert? Can you imagine? Right? And nobody was the slightest bit interested. I couldn't believe it. I thought this was just like the perfect thing. And I guess that's the thing. And actually, when I went to the media, I thought I'd be inundated with, really willing and excited contestant teammates. And I think I had 3 people contact me. I was like, what the heck? And what it tells you is that, when you feel something that's right, and for me at that time I thought, fire out, this is so friggin' awesome. It's you got to go with it. I mean, there's something telling you there, because it's not telling anyone else. It wasn't telling any of my mates. So there's kind of a reason for that, I think, and it wasn't certainly that for me at that time. And I think there are always, at some point in your life, there are things that tweak you big time, and nobody thinks it's like, no one. In fact, they'll think you're nuts. That's probably a sign that you should look into it further. I reckon. Yeah.
I mean, great advice.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think you'll look back and think of things that you perhaps wanted to do at some point. You thought it was absolutely 100%er, and yet you get all these naysayers, and it can easily sway you off your track.
I bet everybody, I'm just guessing that pretty much everybody that's listening to this, I know it resonates with me, but how many times have we had this idea, this passion, this desire to do something, and everyone around us told us, no, you're crazy. No, you can't do that. What is wrong with you? Why can't you just be more like your brother? Why can't you be more like your sister, your mom, your dad, whatever?
What about your career?
Yeah. And most of the time we just say, okay, yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah. That's silly.
It's a bit silly.
Every once in a while, if and when we push through and go do it, then we have that opportunity to look back and now describe it the way you're describing it, and you've got an amazing story. So,
and actually, just to put an extra, some extra context here bearing in mind, 20 years earlier, I'd lost my eldest brother.
Yeah.
To the sea gods, to the sea. And you can imagine what I was, when I was planning this adventure too, by the way. Do you think I could tell Mum and Dad? No way. I couldn't tell them what I was planning.
Good point.
No, I could not tell them.
When did they find out you did it?
Yeah, well, so I was beavering. I'd been working on it for about a month after coming back from Atlanta, and I got the mortgage. I hadn't quite quit my job at that time, but I was about to, and I thought, I've got to, and that's right, I was going to the media too, looking for a teammate.
Yeah, I was curious how you could go to the media without worrying about your parents.
And so I got straight to Dad on the phone, and said, "Look, this is what I'm planning, Dad. It's this great adventure. I've got, first ever rowing race across an ocean, and it's a little rowing boat, and it's going to be, it just fits, all right." And he was quite receptive to it because he knows the ocean, and he didn't seem to be. Then I spoke to Mum briefly. I can't remember what we said, but she didn't seem too negative on it. She was sort of neutral. And we ran off, and I thought, that went all right. And then half an hour later, the phone rang. I said, "Hello, Rob speaking," and it's Mum. And I thought, here we go, flaming heck. And she's going to let rip. You know what she said? She said to me, she says, "Rob, you go for it." She said, "This could be the making of you." Clearly, the Olympics hadn't impressed her at all at that point. But it was kind of, it was a pivotal moment because it just said so much, obviously, about Mum and what she had been through, and that she had the courage and love and support, and wasn't that the most beautiful thing that a parent could do, to release the reins?
I think what she did, not to compare it directly to what you were doing or what you did, but you used the word courage, the courage to release the reins. Because I have a feeling for her to do that was probably just as scary for her as it might have been for you that day when the wind shifted, the day after you threw away 20 days worth of food, and you've got that fear, and, she's your mom, right? You've got kids. You've got a wife, how moms
work.
Now. It's like,
I know now more so than ever. Yep.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. And you weren't married at that time. Did you have a girlfriend at that time that you were trying to answer to? Any crazy stuff going on there?
Yeah, no, she was right into it. Yeah, she was very supportive. I will add another little detail. That's not such a little detail, actually. And this is in context of what my parents, their mindset could have been and perhaps should have been, given this news I was just giving them. Wind back the clock back to Kerry, and when we heard the news about Kerry, 8 months after we heard that news, my second eldest brother John took his life, committed suicide.
Wow.
And they were very close. They were only sort of separated by 14, 15 months, I think, in age, and very close, very tight. And so my parents had this double whammy within, an extended period of unknown, then the worst news, and then this double whammy. Their second son takes his life, and they just went through absolute hell, and yet they were prepared to let me go and have my adventures. I thought that was amazing.
Rob, I'm just curious, and we don't need to discuss this. We can edit it out if we need to, but I'm going to ask you. Do you think that what happened to your two brothers, I just don't know what else to say. Do you feel like maybe you had a little bit of a death wish when you set out on this journey across the Atlantic? Was there kind of I don't give a crap what happens because I've got these things going on, which would be completely normal to have going on in your head? I'm just curious if you think that drove you to do some of this stuff.
Well, look, here's the thing, and I've learned since that in the formative years, in those teenage years, that bulletproof that we just said earlier, we are bulletproof at that age. We think we are. And when you have that acute grief in your life, some sort of research has proven that you definitely have a sense of trying to prove your immortality. I don't know, am I getting this wrong? To try and prove that you are not immortal. I'm not sure. No, I haven't got my head around this right. To really answer your question, but I do know that whole mortality thing, as a bulletproof teenager, having that grief has a big impact on that. Suddenly you realise you're not immortal. and that may have played a role later in life in some small degree. Definitely not consciously, though, Jason. I wouldn't say that in any shape or form. I was consciously setting out just to test that mortality thing. For me, I think it's, don't know. Who knows?
There's just so many different things that, because the brain is a complex thing.
Yeah.
And when you look at a family that went through what your family went through with losing, your two brothers, I mean, we could imagine a variety of different directions anybody could go with that. One is become an Olympic athlete and be the quickest one to row a boat across the Atlantic Ocean. That's one option, which it sounds like that's the option you took. So I'm just,
that's not a bad option.
It's
a funny thing. I'd be most interested in if any of your listeners, Jason, have any views on that actually, or theories. I'd be very interested to hear.
All right, cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing it with us, and anybody that's listening to this that has some insights, you'll be able to connect with Rob to discuss that, and then we can come back and have another conversation because I'd be curious to hear about it as well. All right, so that was pretty cool. And you said you were. So how old were you when you went across the Atlantic?
For 33-ish, 33.
33. Okay.
1997.
Were you and then you went to the Olympics. I don't remember what year Atlanta was, but 88
96.
Or something.
That was the year before. No, 96 Atlanta.
96. Okay.
And the Atlantic race was the following year, 97.
I'm curious. Did you feel like kind of one of the older guys in that sport in your 30s?
So I was sort of getting into that. Yeah, I was getting into that.
I don't know anything about that sport. I'm just curious.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I hung in there for, and I stayed in the sport after the Atlantic race too for another few years through to 2000. So I was definitely in the geriatric stage then.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have kept going even longer than I did in the end, but yeah.
I can, it's just interesting. I don't know enough about the sport. I've got a friend who actually, she was part of a gold medal team in Atlanta. I'm sure it was Atlanta. Oh, yeah. And I think she was like 18 when she was there. Wow. I think that was just kind of the norm in her particular sport. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. All right. So you're mid-30s, you won this race. Was there a financial reward involved with winning this race? Were you able to recoup all the money back into your mortgage and all those costs and expenses, or was it just a pride thing, or what did you get out of that? We discussed some of the stuff you got out of it, but I mean, I'm just curious.
Well, look, what happened when I got back was suddenly people wanted to hear about the adventure, and I was getting calls say, "Would you come along to this function and that function, and here I'll pay you,
podcasts."
I know the podcast would pay me, but no. So I ended up doing speaking. I mean, I'd quit my job, as I mentioned earlier, and I ended up becoming a professional speaker, motivational speaker, telling my story, and I ended up doing that and still doing it for the last 30 years. It's crazy, only 25 years, and I've done that. That was sort of a full-time thing for most of that time up until COVID. Actually, COVID, I lost a lot. Well, that sort of slowed it right up to a standstill because I couldn't. Because I stepped forward a few years, quite a number of years, to Rachel, married, children, and then deciding to go sailing. And what I would do is I'd every 6 or 8 weeks, I'd fly back to New Zealand for a speaking engagement. And I was also an event director of some sporting events that I put together. And suddenly I couldn't fly home, and so that just shut down completely, and lost most of our income. So we'd set off to circumnavigate the world on our sailboat with our family, based on my continued ability to earn a living speaking and doing event directing work. And and it came to a grinding halt. So anyway, we went on to this whole YouTube thing, and that's what we're doing now, is we're trying to make that work. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so it's shifted from going back to New Zealand or, in-person events.
Yeah.
To have these conversations to kind of the social media influencers, right? It's kind of what you're doing now.
Sort of. Yeah, and look, that's right. I mean, we're just, I don't know, influence is the word, but certainly having adventures and showing what's possible out there in the big old world, and learning and sharing and learning things along the way. And I do Zoom talks every now and then now, but nothing like I used to do when I was there and present, in the flesh and blood.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I don't like the word influencer myself. I threw it out there, but I love how you came back and said, no, it's kind of like we're just sharing. We're having adventures, inspiring people, sharing. There's other people out there that call themselves influencers that are not necessarily inspiring people to do amazing things. And I mean, as somebody who, go ahead.
Oh, I will say, actually, it's an amazing, and it's a really cool thing that the number of people are not influenced by us, but they share the journey and they live vicariously by us. And the adventures we have, they literally, I mean, seriously, people really join in through the medium of YouTube. It's incredible how so we had a lot of contact with people to that end that, they can no longer sail, or they'd always wanted to sail, but they never will now. But just joining our journey in the things we do and see and the people we meet and the mayhem and the mishaps and the balls ups and and all that stuff and the challenges. And they love it. They seem to really love it. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And it's so cool, though, with the technology that we have, just the fact that you and I are able to, I was in Malaysia last summer. You're there now. I'm in Colombia. And we're having this conversation. We're looking at each other on a video screen. And you can do your YouTube episodes and people can follow your journey. And basically, kind of like when you rode across the Atlantic, you had sponsors, right? You went out and got sponsors. And those sponsors sponsored you not because they thought they were going to make a lot of money out of the deal. It's because they were they just thought it was cool. They're like, I think it's cool. This guy, I enjoy what he's doing. I'll give him some money, help him make it work. He can slap a sticker on the side of the plywood boat or whatever, but they weren't really sponsoring you because of thinking, we're going to get a great financial return. And I've seen with a lot of stuff in social media and YouTube, it's kind of the same thing. I see people that are going and doing amazing stuff. It's like, okay, I'm happy to support that in one way or the other, help get the word out, share it. I'm sure on your YouTube videos, it's like, hey, like, subscribe, share, whatever. And so there's ways that people can kind of pitch in and then they're part of it, which is very cool. And just the fact that we have the technology to do that is very cool.
That's right. And that other, what's levered from that for us is the Patreon, for the arts, the crowdfunding for the arts. I mean, whether you're a musician, an artist, or a video producer, people can chip in on that platform. It's amazing. And we're not sustaining what we're doing yet by any means, but jingoes, it's helping us a big deal. And I do believe if we keep pushing on, we'll be able to not end into our savings any further. That's the plan.
Hopefully so. I get that completely. So I really, really, really want to touch on how on earth did you get your teenage boys to do this? Was that an easy thing? Because I could see that going a few different directions. I've got a 17-year-old. And I can't even imagine, so tell us.
Yeah, timing is important, and timing's everything often, isn't it? And we left at a time when our eldest was 11 going 12. Our youngest was 8. And I wish we'd left a couple of years earlier. It's still again. But that was the key. We still had this captive audience. We're saying we're doing this. We're doing this. And if we'd waited 2 or 3 years later, might have been a bit more challenging. And but no, we did it at a really good time. The kids they just lapped it up. This big adventure. And we first bought this boat back in 2014. We sailed out of Whangarei Heads didn't know what we were doing. I remember going out through the heads, and there was a standing waves from current versus wind, and the boys out on the bow, and we were going up and down. The front of the boat was diving into these waves. The kids are getting taken out. It was so dangerous and so foolhardy.
This was your first outing?
Yeah.
Like we just set sail? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, we were motoring into it, actually. We couldn't set the sails at that time, but yeah, we just got to this part. It was just, but there was lots of stuff, and the kids lapped it up. They absolutely lapped it up, and I'm so proud of them because they were so enthusiastic. And that first year, because we didn't know anything about what we were doing, we would go out as often as we could. And when midwinter in Auckland, we took the boat down to Auckland, big, wonderful harbour for sailing there, Harrika Gulf, and they had the America's Cup there and everything. And we would go out in midwinter, as often as the weekends, and there'd be no one out. We'd be the only ones kind of sailing around out in the Gulf and around into the islands. And and Anchorage would be, during summer, there'd be 100+ boats all crammed into this anchorage, and we'd turn up, there'd be no one there midwinter because it was kind of just bleak.
Oh, okay.
But we loved it. We loved it. And, so it was a big, steep learning curve. And then about 12 months after we bought the boat, we set off on our first ocean passage up into the South Pacific.
Wow. Now, do you still maintain a house in New Zealand?
Yes, we still have our home. Yes, we still have our home, and we have that rented out. Yeah. Okay. Paying the costs.
So you've got that rented out like long term, like it's not you can't just go home anytime you want and set up camp because you've got renters in there, right?
Yeah, no, I went back there recently and just hung out with friends actually. So yeah, but
okay.
No.
All right, very cool. And I'm curious, the psychology behind. So when I started my full-time journey, my financial situation, I'm sure was different than yours, but I couldn't necessarily afford to maintain a home back in the US and do my journey. So some of the decisions were financial, but other parts of the decision were just like, if I don't have a home to go back to, I'm more likely to just keep going. It's kind of like the phrase "burn the boats."
Sure.
That I'm sure right. Maybe as a sailor you've heard. I guess the story is that was it when Cortez was out conquering, parts of South America or whatever. They landed on an island, and he turned to his men and said, "Okay, men, burn the boats."
Seriously?
Like, why? And I was like, well, if we burn the boats, there's no other option. We're going to conquer this island. We're going to take this island because the alternative, there's, we can't just jump back on the boats and sail away. So I've heard that term or that story used. I have no idea if there's any truth to it. I kind of doubt it. But when I left Arizona to start my journeys, and I sold all my stuff and gave up my place, and there was definitely this like burn the boats moment. Like I don't have anywhere else to go back to other than my mom's house. And as a middle-aged guy, I don't want to rely on living with my mom as my plan B. So it's like, okay, I'm going to go make this digital nomad thing work one way or the other. So I was just curious, if you kept your place, was it, well, this way we have a place to come back to if we want to, or was it just, hey, no, we've got money invested in it. It's a good financial investment, so we're going to keep it and rent it out. So what thought process did you guys go through when it came to that?
Well, it was purely that we were able to, we didn't have to sell it to do this. That was the long and short of it. We had enough in the bank to sustain the outgoings, and the income from the thing was going to cover the mortgages and the outgoing costs there. So we just literally didn't have to sell it. I think if it came to push, came to shove, we would have done that too. But so we're very lucky in that sense that we have got a plan B to go to should this kind of fall over for whatever reason.
But anybody that's listening to this that's been thinking about sponsoring their journey, just forget that he said that. He has no plan B. keep them going. You don't want it. You don't want it to be the not the cruising Kiwis, the homeless Kiwis. Anyway,
we're certainly not planning to go back anytime soon.
It's pretty cool. Yeah. And I know you've shared some stories already with us, but I'm curious about with this when we spoke, a little bit earlier, you were talking about the cell phone, like leaving the cell phone somewhere. And I know that when I travel, there's always there's certain things that keep coming up. It's like finding an ATM that's working on that day or a laundromat to get my clothes cleaned or whatever. I spend so much time doing these things that are so routine. when you're back home, living in a place. I'm sure you have that on the boat. And
Sure.
I'm curious, I guess, maybe what's the one or two things that come up the most that people that have not done this need to know before they think about doing it?
Yes. Look, we still eat like everyone else does. Yes, in theory, there could be more fish involved in the diet, but we still have to get the daily, whatever daily rations is, whether it's your rice and bread or whatever, but meat and veg and all that stuff, and fruit in particular. We eat a lot of fruit, but we can't grow any of that stuff here, so we have to rely on supermarkets like anyone else does. Just that when we do go shopping, we do big shops and we shop for a week or a month sometimes. At sea, and so that's the similarity, but the difference is that it can be big shopping things, and you do run out of stuff at sea sometimes. That what else?
That's a good point, because that is a good point, because sometimes I've drawn this parallel between kind of the RVing lifestyle and the sailing lifestyle.
Right.
But that's one big difference with an RV. It's not that hard to just physically, if you're in a park, it's probably not that hard to just walk over to a market or whatever. Yeah. And when you're in a boat, that's a little bit more challenging. Okay. What else?
The beautiful thing is with that, though, is the different supermarkets, I suppose, we get to see. And this is different cultures that we visit, and the amazing markets that we go to, and the people we meet, and the food we get to try and consume, and so amazing. I mean, we love our food. Everyone loves their food, and different ways of cooking, preparing, and eating it, and different ingredients.
You're in a part of the world right now that's like the most amazing. I spent some time on Penang, which is just south of where you are. And oh my gosh, the food was. I was there with my 17-year-old son. And I thought the food just blew my mind, and he just wanted to go to McDonald's and Burger King. He's like, "Dad, can we go to I think it was just McDonald's." And I'm like, "We're on Penang.
That's so typical.
We're not going to McDonald's." And now he's like, "Yeah." So there were a couple times he just went without dinner, because I was like, "I'm not going to take you to the McDonald's on Penang. You're welcome to come down and have some of this curry stuff or whatever, some noodles or whatever." But yeah, it was an interesting experience. So,
well, there's a curry called the Penang curry, isn't there? Yeah, and it's named after that island because it's such a specialty.
Yeah, it's like this. It was an interesting thing. I love my son. He is adventurous, but sometimes I think it was just for him. We'd been together for 2 months, traveling around, and he's a little bit more of a homebody than I am. So I think he just misses some of those things from back home. So,
you're exposing him to different things, and he'll come around later. He'll come around.
He will. It was actually really cool. I don't know if you're familiar with, I've mentioned this on a few episodes of the podcast, but there's this game called GeoGuessr that you can go online and go to geoguessr.com or whatever it is. And what they do is they drop you kind of randomly onto a Google Street View. So you know how there's Google Street Views of all the different streets pretty much in the world, I guess.
Yep.
And they randomly drop you someplace, and you don't know where you're at. And the idea is that you got to look around. You can navigate using little Street View navigations. You look around for clues to figure out where you're at. And then you can drop a pin on a map for where you think you are. And the closer you are to that spot, the more points you get. And, sometimes you spend 15 minutes and you're like, I'm pretty sure I'm in Southeast Asia somewhere. And you just kind of take a guess. You drop the pin, and then it comes up and you're in, the Caribbean or something. But it might be great. I mean, you guys are out seeing it. I don't really play it that much, but my son really, really likes it. Yeah. And I remember a few months ago, he'd sent me a message because we communicate a lot by WhatsApp, on a almost basically a daily basis, because I'm in Colombia and he's in Arizona right now. And anyway, he was playing GeoGuessr, and they dropped him right in front of Pedaling Street in Kuala Lumpur. Right. And he's like, Dad, we stood right there. Like, he didn't have to navigate around. He just, like, the minute they drop him in, you see the screen, and he knew exactly where he was. It said Pedaling Street, And we had stood right in that spot, and he was so excited. He just thought that out of all the places in the world, they would drop him. And it was a moment of like, that's pretty cool, because he's seeing these places, he's recognizing them, he's getting excited about it. And it's not just the game. I like to think that he was also excited about being on Pedaling Street when we were there. So anyway,
that is wicked. That's way cool. That's amazing. Actually, you think about the size of our little rock, and you're getting into that one spot. Incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So anyway, thanks for letting me share that. I'm more interested in your stories, because I think when you're traveling and seeing these things, your kids are constantly seeing these new things. That's pretty excited. Are they still as excited?
Geography. Yeah, in fact, our youngest is hassling us to move on and head on, because we're talking about right now heading west into the Indian Ocean, or because we haven't spent nearly enough time in Southeast Asia. So much we have not seen. We've been here since October 22. We arrived in Indonesia, sailed through Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, following the letters he wrote and where he said he had travelled to. Anyway, and then we got up here. Do we stay for another year and see what we haven't seen, or try to, or head west? And I was like, come on, you got to circumnavigate, Dad. You got to move on. You got to move on to the next big destination. You got to keep moving. So yeah, you're right. Okay, so we are looking in the next week or two to sail to Sri Lanka, maybe India, Maldives, maybe Seychelles, and then to Tanzania, and then decide whether we go up through the Red Sea past a certain war zone, or head south under South Africa, and then off to Brazil.
Oh, what?
So we're sort of
what horrible decisions you have to make. Those are horrible. I don't know how you deal with that. I'm curious, because of your story, with Carrie. Did you go to Cambodia?
Yes. So part of our pretty early on, when we set off from New Zealand, actually right at the start, we thought, if we get into that area, wouldn't it be great to follow Kerry's journey up through Indonesia? And as it turned out, we arrived in Australia. We were planning to stay in Australia November 19 for 6 months. We got hit by lightning the next month, December 19, 2019. And then while we were hauling out, this whole COVID carry-on arrived in 2020. And we ended up staying, after we repaired the boat from lightning strike, we relaunched and ended up circumnavigating around Australia for the next 3 years. We stayed in Australia when we had planned to get up into Asia much sooner. But that was amazing, circumnavigating that huge continent. What a great time to get there. It's extraordinary. And then we ended up in Darwin, which is where Kerry set off from. And we hadn't intentionally sort of planned to go to Darwin. We just kind of ended up in Darwin and thought, right, this is where we launched the real journey following his journey. Went up through Indonesia, some of the islands he went to, and some of the anchorages we stopped in the exact same spots, sometimes accidentally, believe it or not, but other times on purpose. And then we went up into Malaysia. And now we were hoping to sail, to answer your question, we were hoping to sail to Cambodia itself, but our eldest boy, Finn, now, as I said, was trying for the New Zealand rowing team, and he only had a 2-week window at Christmas last year where he could come and join us. He really wanted to come with us to Cambodia, so we couldn't work to sail. So we left the boat in Malaysia, and we all met up in Phnom Penh, and we went through the prison that Kerry was incarcerated. It's a museum now, likened to the Auschwitz of Cambodia. What occurred there, and Kerry's photos there, and I made a film actually about telling the whole story back in an amazing group of people. I produced it, this incredible people, directors, and telling Kerry's story via my journey of discovery of what happened, the detail of what happened to Kerry and to the other victims of Cambodia. And I ended up testifying in the War Crimes Tribunal against the first person to be brought to trial for, representing 2 to 3 million lives lost in the Khmer Rouge years, and it was the person who ran the prison that my brother was incarcerated in, where he oversaw his treatment and torturing and murder and subsequent execution. And that was a pretty challenging time, to sit in the courtroom facing this guy and telling him what I thought of him. And we made a film, Brother Number One, came from that period. But it was myself and my wife was there too to support me as we went there. But to take our children there was a different story, and they're now young adults too. It was something else, and it was.
I can only imagine. I mean, it's yeah. So there was a picture of Carrie in the prison that's now a museum.
Yep.
And
wow. Yeah. So there was sort of a handful of Westerners that were caught up in that awful time. And yes, and most of them, I think, photos there somewhere in the museum as well.
Okay. So where can our listeners find, you said the name of the movie that you put together, Brother Number One? Brother Number One. I believe you can get it on Amazon Prime, but also the director has it streamed on her platform, which is op.co.nz. She's a director. She's produced a lot of human rights films from New Zealand. And you have a link through that to that through your website, because we've got your website. It will be listed in the show notes. Sure. Okay, so if someone goes that direction, it sounds like that'd be interesting to watch. Sure. So, all right, cool. So I will just say quickly that that period, obviously, could we do YouTube, and obviously we filmed our journey to Cambodia and what occurred there, and it's very moving. It was an amazing time there. That were people we met, persecutors and the persecuted, and I think if anyone's interested in that side of that bit of history, the film obviously is something worth looking at. But if you want something quick and easy to access, we have episodes there, 2 episodes we spent in Cambodia on our channel. Right on your YouTube channel. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Oh, very cool. I know we've been chatting for quite a while. I'm sure I missed some things I should have asked or forgot to ask. And there was one thing you'd hinted at that just caught my attention because I'm into fishing, and you'd mentioned something about fishing mayhem, disasters. I'm sure you've got a story or something about something that happened when you were fishing. I do recall, I think you have interesting, your interviewers into fishing. There's some, I saw in your podcast, you had some fly fishermen on there and bits and pieces. I'm not much of a fisherman, but I have caught a few decent sort of fish, but I've been caught by fish themselves or more the lures on more than one occasion. And it's happened to me. What do you mean by that? Help me understand. When you say you got caught by the fish. Well, what happened was we had this dorado, or we call them mahi-mahi in New Zealand, and they're the big, or some people call them dolphin fish as well. Dolphin fish, yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we had this big, beautiful female actually on the line, and we brought her in. I don't know if you've ever boated one of these things, but when they get on board, they just go ape shit. They just go nuts, and this thing. We got on board this whopping great fish, and it just started going crazy. And I was trying to control it, and while I was controlling it, it let rip, and the lure, one of those 3-barbed lures, went through my toes, and 3 barbs went through 3 different toes, and it came out through the other side and all sorts of. And then I was stuck to the fish, and so I was barbed, and then this fish was hanging on to me, and I was flying around the boat, and oh my goodness, it was horrible. It was a disaster. And then I ended up having to cut the slur off, and and that's the second time that's happened. Kind of wishing I would not have asked you about that. I wasn't prepared for that. Okay. Jeez. Yeah, and the stupid thing was that is the second time I've been lured by a mahi-mahi, but I think it's when you're sailing too, you have lots of things can go wrong, and from sail disasters to ropes getting caught up on the rudders, and we've had to cut off ropes in the middle of great whites, west coast of Australia during the whaling. The humpback whales come up to calve, and the great white sharks follow them up because the calves are very vulnerable. Mm-hmm. We were right in the middle of the season,
and we were sailing north up the coast, and it was about 2:00 in the morning, got caught on a crab pot and brought us to a halt. We had to go into the ocean, full moon, and we were very visible. We were probably absolutely nothing wrong. We were probably safe as houses, but to get in that dark water and knowing there's, but we're kind of becoming shark fodder and having to sit under there cutting this rope away. It was kind of, but we've had so many difficult times like that just add to the whole adventure, really, because we have beautiful times and all that stuff too. But it's those difficult, challenging moments that sort of stick in your mind. It's kind of what it's all about in some ways.
Well, and I suspect there's other periods of time. Well, I don't know. Are there periods of time that are kind of filled with a little bit of boredom? Does that come up?
Oh, well, what we're about to set off to, there's the monotony of a passage. We're looking to do a potential, the first passage will be about 1,200 miles. It's going to be 10, 12, 14 days, depending on the weather, 15 days. And it's monotonous. But it's lovely too, because you're sort of isolated from everything around you. There's nothing you can do about anything outside the world. If things are falling over, well, that's not my problem. I can't deal with it here, So it's quite lovely in that sense. And you get into a daily routine, which is wicked too. But it is monotonous. And the thing is, you're always anxious that something's going to go wrong, because invariably things kind of do go wrong, at some point. And you just hope that it's not going to be that bad, and you're mid-ocean that you're going to have to, it's going to be mildly catastrophic, or catastrophic, dare I say the word.
So it can be monotonous, but still kind of exciting at the same time.
Well, you don't know what's around the corner. You just don't know what's going to happen next. There's storms come out of nowhere, or you hit a container or a whale, or just stuff happens. And that's the thing.
And you embrace it. You've developed this personality and this style of embracing that.
And you have to, because the reality is, Jason, if you're sitting there watching TV all day, probably not a lot's going to go wrong for you. You might have a heart attack. You actually will have a heart attack. But while you're waiting for that heart attack to arrive, there's not much that's really going to go wrong. Someone might break into your house and rob you, perhaps. I don't know. That's about as bad. But if you get out and do stuff, then stuff is going to happen. Great things are going to happen, for one, and you must remember that, because that's the big challenges. Wonderful things happen. You meet incredible people. You discover huge blocks of information that you didn't know before, and it just furthers who you are as a human being. But things happen, and the more you do it, the more it's almost the hunter-gatherer thing, where the saber-tooth is around the sitting in that cave. You become a little bit more aware of your worldly environment, and that is hugely invigorating. Can be pretty tiring and exhausting as well, but that's life. You're alive when you're feeling those emotions. You're alive when you're having that anxiety, and you're trying to prepare for the worst and you're hoping for the best. That's life. Sitting in your room watching TV or your video games, that's not life.
I love that. I suspect that a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist may have a different perspective than I do. But my biggest fear has really always been boredom. For me, it's like my living hell. My living hell would be just sitting somewhere being bored the rest of my life, or just the moments in my life when I've felt exceptionally bored. Yeah. I've got a very, very, very strong drive to change that. I have a really hard time sitting still, and the more stable and consistent my life is, the more depressed I get, the more down I get. So, a therapist might call that ADD, ADHD, any number of things. The more people I speak to on this podcast, the more people I've been in the tourism business for a long time, adventure travel business for a long time. Yeah. Most of the people I meet, I feel like I can resonate with that. Whereas back home in a more traditional setting, a more traditional job, most of the people around me just kind of think, Jason, you need to sit still. Calm down, settle down. Why do you have to be go, go, go all the time? So,
Good on you. Look, I actually think that well, actually, firstly, and I'm going to take this back to the youngsters' point of view. I actually try and kind of given up on sometimes I don't bother so much, but certainly I enjoy seeing, or enjoyed certainly when they were younger, seeing the kids when they did get bored. And it makes them be creative and do what you do and get out and do stuff, doesn't it? And seriously, and that's what it's about. That's what I think boredom is a feature of allowing you to think about, I've got to go and do something because I'm sitting here getting bored. But here we have
it's a motivator.
It is a motivator. That's exactly what it is. And the problem is, though, we've got these screens that are causing massive behavioural problems and loss of learning opportunities through sitting and distracting us through stimulation from external sources, not self-stimulated action to go out and proactively do stuff. That's a real concern. And every family in the universe faces that problem right now with kids. So I empathize with that.
No, you're absolutely right. And yeah, very cool. Hey, Rob, we touched on so many things.
Thumbs up.
You've got a YouTube channel that you're like constantly putting out stuff and doing things. I feel like you and I could probably do a whole podcast, just the two of us, like a whole series of them, and discuss your journey and all that stuff.
Oh, man.
I love it. And I'm curious, is there anything really important that I missed? I should have asked that you want to make sure our listeners hear before we wrap it up.
Look, this, I don't know. Look, we've covered quite a lot there. It's been really nice talking, Jason. I don't know. I mean, if anyone, all I can say is if you want to, I don't know. We've had some great adventures, misadventures. Oh, look, you know what? I will say there's one little anecdote I will discuss, actually, and it's a pretty powerful one because it happened to us almost broke into it in our first couple of minutes of this discussion. And it was, and I'm saying this because what came out of it was a massive learning for us. And I think, and it's actually already proven to be so, massive learning for anyone else who's thinking about this. A lot of families going sailing with their families around the world, wherever they are, invariably get out of the boat and go swimming, and invariably at some point, not just snorkel around coral reefs, start doing free diving. Going down deep and getting deeper and deeper and mucking around and playing and having lots of fun and adventure doing that. And it's a wonderful thing. And it becomes a sport for some people. And at the highest level, they go down, tens of dozens, actually 100 meters plus. Free diving, no air. And our boys got into this recently. And I mentioned early on that Finn came back from the World Rowing Champs. He won a silver medal, actually, at the Under-23 World Champs. Wow. And then he turned up here and immediately jumped in the water with the two boys and started free diving. Now, they'd been diving for about an hour and a half, mucking around. I got in with them eventually and started mucking around for a while too. And then we did this one dive. It was about 30 to 32 meters deep. And the youngest boy, Ivan, who's just over there actually, made it. It was his personal record. No fins, just diving down and then pushing up and kicking back to the surface. Declan and Finn, the two artists, decide, we've got to have a crack at this too. They go down and I go down with them, not the whole way, but I watch them push off the bottom. We get to the top. Declan gets to the top first. I look down and Finn's unconscious. He's out. He is unconscious. He's about 7 meters down. And he's like this. He's starfished. He's gone. I shout, Finn's gone, and dive in straight after him. And I'd just come up from a dive, so I'm pretty exhausted, and I wasn't even sure I could get back down to him. Got to him, dead weight. I mean, I tell you, I was then thinking, are we going to be able to get this kid back to the surface? The other two boys got down after me, and we did get him back, and we did CPR in the water, mouth to mouth, and he did come round. And long story short, he was all good, 100% all good. But we made some massive mistakes from that, massive mistakes that we didn't realise we were making. I won't go into that at all at the moment, but from there, we then interviewed a world champion, a world record holder, freediver, William Trubridge, held freedive world record for no fins, just bare human effort, 102 metres. And we had a massive learning experience on our channel that if anyone's interested in that, they could go check that out. It's about 10 episodes ago now. So
holy shit!
I just think that's something. I just wanted to say that because you learn stuff. As I said, stuff happens, and sometimes it's not good stuff, and that was a big learning for us.
Yeah, I've heard like anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Yeah. I do think there's some truth to that, but as we know, we've had the conversation. There've been sometimes people don't survive things, and that's
it could easily be bad for us.
Yeah, that's really tough. So thank you for sharing that, and I definitely am going to encourage everybody to get onto your YouTube channel, to follow what you're doing. It's pretty darn cool, and I'll look forward to following it and having another conversation with you at some point in the future, maybe actually in person. I'd love to see your setup. I just think that'd be really cool. So you mentioned
we have guests on board.
That's on my list. So maybe we'll meet there. So Rob, thank you so much, and send your greetings to the family and take care of them and have fun.
Thanks, Chase. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.